Before you even think about who he is, before you even start questioning what kind of man you want, before you demand respect, loyalty, or love from anyone else, you must first know who you are. This is the foundation. Without it, you are walking into the world blind, expecting others to define you, shape you, and validate you. And when you give away that power, you are no longer in control. You become dependent on how others see you instead of how you see yourself. Think about it. How can you expect anyone to recognize your value if you haven't recognized it yourself? If you don't know your standards, your boundaries, your principles, then anyone can walk into your life, set their own terms, and you'll bend to them because you don't have your own. Men respect clarity. People respect identity. If you don't know who you are, you're not just lost, you're a target for manipulation, disrespect, and disappointment. Knowing who you are is not about labels. It's not about job titles, money in the bank, or how many people clap for you. Knowing who you are means standing in front of a mirror and saying, "This is me. These are my values. These are my strengths. These are my weaknesses. And I accept all of it without shame." Because when you accept yourself fully, nobody can use your flaws against you. Nobody can break you down with insults or comparisons. When you know who you are, you walk differently. Your presence changes. You no longer seek validation because you've already validated yourself. And let me tell you something that's magnetic. Men, women, leaders, competitors, they can all feel it. They know when someone is grounded. They know when someone has that inner core that cannot be shaken. That's why people follow leaders. They sense conviction, and conviction only comes from knowing yourself deeply. But most people don't take the time to do this work. They spend their lives chasing relationships, chasing attention, chasing recognition, without ever stopping to ask, who am I? What do I stand for? What do I refuse to compromise on? And then they wonder why they keep ending up disrespected, abandoned, or unfulfilled. The answer is simple. You can't attract what you want if you don't even know who you are. So, how do you start? You start by stripping away the noise. Get rid of everyone else's opinions for a moment. Forget what your friends think. Forget what society expects. Forget what your past has told you. Ask yourself, what do I truly value? What do I want my life to stand for? What kind of energy do I want to carry into every room? These are not easy questions. They require honesty. They require courage. They require you to face truths you might have been running from. For example, if you value respect, then you must first live respectfully yourself. If you value discipline, then you cannot live in chaos. If you value honesty, then you cannot lie to yourself about who you are and what you want. Because knowing yourself is not just about celebrating your strengths, it's about confronting your weaknesses and deciding how you will rise above them. Men can sense when a woman knows who she is. It's in her tone, her posture, the way she sets boundaries without fear, the way she refuses to accept less than what she deserves. And here's the truth: men treat women according to the standards those women accept. If you don't know yourself, your standards are blurry, and blurred standards invite blurred treatment. But when you are clear about who you are, you set the tone. You decide how you are approached, how you are spoken to, and how you are treated. That's power. And it doesn't stop there. Knowing who you are protects you from comparison. Because the moment you know yourself, you stop trying to be someone else. You stop scrolling endlessly, wishing you had her body, her lifestyle, his wealth, their success. You realize that your journey is yours alone. You realize that nobody else's timeline applies to you, and that realization sets you free. Freedom is the ultimate respect you give yourself, freedom from comparison, from judgment, from needing external approval. The world is full of people who look confident but are hollow inside. They have achievements, they have relationships, they have material success, but they don't know who they are, and that's why they still feel empty. Don't fall into that trap. Build your foundation first. Know yourself so deeply that even if everything external was stripped away, the money, the career, the attention, you would still stand tall because your worth was never tied to those things. Knowing who you are gives you unshakable strength because life will test you. People will leave, failures will come, opportunities will vanish. And if your identity is tied to any of those external factors, you'll crumble when they do. But if your identity is rooted in self-awareness, in values, in unbreakable self-belief, nothing can destroy you. That's the difference between being fragile and being unshakable. And here's the beauty of it: once you know who you are, you stop asking the wrong questions. You stop asking, who is he? Will he respect me? Will he choose me? Instead, the question becomes, does he align with who I am? Does he respect my values? Does he deserve to stand next to me? That shift changes everything, because you are no longer chasing, you are choosing. You are no longer begging, you are deciding. And that is where true respect begins. Too many people walk into relationships, friendships, and partnerships looking outward before they ever look inward. They want to know, who is he? What does he bring? How will he treat me? But here's the truth: before you ever ask who he is, you must already know who you are. Otherwise, you hand him the power to define you. And when you let someone else define you, you lose yourself. If you don't know who you are, you'll tolerate anything. You'll accept behavior that disrespects you. You'll excuse words that cut you down. You'll cling to someone who doesn't value you simply because you don't know your own value. That's how people end up in cycles of disrespect. They skipped the foundation. They were more focused on who the other person was instead of securing their own identity first. When you know yourself, you are unshakable. You don't have to ask, am I worthy? Because you already know. You don't have to ask, does he see my value? Because you've already claimed it. That confidence radiates. Men can feel it. People can sense it. You walk differently when your worth is not up for negotiation. That's why it's dangerous to skip the step of knowing yourself first. You end up negotiating with your dignity. And once you do that, you've already lost ground. Knowing who you are means defining your standards before anyone else tries to. If respect is a standard for you, then you don't wait until someone disrespects you to figure out where the line is drawn. You already know it, and you enforce it instantly. If loyalty matters to you, then you don't settle for someone who plays games, who is halfway committed. You already know that's not aligned with who you are. Standards are not created in the heat of the moment. They are decided in advance by people who know themselves deeply. And let's be clear, knowing who you are is not arrogance. It is not ego. It is clarity. It is strength. It is refusing to live life on borrowed definitions. Because when you lack clarity, you attract confusion. When you lack standards, you invite chaos. When you lack identity, you hand over control to anyone who wants to shape you. But when you are clear on who you are, people know instantly how to approach you, because you project it without speaking a word. You see, the most dangerous question you can ask too early is, who is he? Because that question makes you a seeker, not a chooser. It makes you chase qualities in someone else while ignoring the qualities you need to strengthen in yourself. But when you know yourself first, the question shifts. You no longer ask, who is he? You ask, does who he is align with who I am? That one shift transforms everything. Suddenly, you are not chasing respect, you are filtering for it. You are not begging for love, you are demanding alignment. This is why self-awareness is power. Self-awareness prevents you from lowering your standards. It prevents you from clinging to the wrong people out of fear of being alone. Because when you know who you are, you also know this: being alone is never worse than being with someone who drains you, disrespects you, or diminishes you. Only people who don't know themselves believe that loneliness is the greatest danger. But the real danger is being surrounded by people who make you lose yourself piece by piece until you don't recognize the person staring back in the mirror. That's why knowing yourself is not optional, it's survival, it is protection, it is your shield. Think about the strongest leaders, the most respected people in history. They all had one thing in common: they knew exactly who they were. They didn't bend with every opinion. They didn't crumble under criticism. They didn't shrink when people disapproved. They stood firm because they were anchored in self-awareness. That same principle applies to you. You want to be treated like a queen, then you must know your crown exists before anyone else sees it. This journey requires honesty, brutal honesty, because knowing yourself is not about painting a perfect picture, it's about accepting both your strengths and your weaknesses. If you are insecure, admit it. If you are undisciplined, confront it. If you are afraid, face it. Because the person who lies to themselves cannot truly know themselves. And the person who does not know themselves will always search for identity in someone else. That's why people settle for relationships that strip them of their dignity. They've made someone else's approval their mirror. But when you know who you are, everything changes. You become selective, not because you are picky or difficult, but because you understand alignment matters more than attention. You no longer say yes to everyone who knocks. You open the door only to those who match your vision, your values, your standards. That's how queens operate. That's how powerful men operate. That's how unbreakable people operate. And the truth is, once you master this, respect is automatic. You won't have to demand it. You won't have to fight for it. People will feel it in the way you carry yourself. They will sense it in your tone, in your boundaries, in your consistency. Men will not treat you like an option. They will treat you like a standard. Because you already set the tone by knowing who you are. Every mistake people make in relationships, every disappointment they feel when it comes to respect, and every heartbreak they suffer often comes down to one thing. They never stop to know themselves first. They entered situations asking, who is he? What does he want? How does he see me? Instead of asking the most important question, who am I? What do I deserve? What will I never accept? When you do not know yourself, you are like a leaf in the wind. Wherever the wind blows, you follow. And the truth is, men respect women who are rooted, who are solid, who cannot be moved by every passing trend, every sweet word, or every shallow promise. Because when you know yourself, you carry a presence that cannot be faked. People can feel it without you saying a single word. Knowing yourself is not just about what you like or dislike. It's about clarity of character. It's about knowing your values so deeply that no man, no situation, no temptation can make you compromise them. If loyalty is part of your identity, then you cannot accept dishonesty. If respect is part of your core, then you cannot tolerate disrespect even once. But if you don't know yourself, you will ignore red flags, you will excuse bad behavior, and you will justify treatment that chips away at your self-worth. That's why it is dangerous to skip the step of self-awareness. You lose yourself trying to keep someone else. Let me tell you something. Respect does not start with how someone treats you. Respect starts with how you treat yourself. When you know yourself, you no longer beg to be valued, because you show people through your standards how to value you. The way you walk, the way you speak, the way you enforce your boundaries, that is all a reflection of whether you know yourself or not. If you are unclear about your worth, people will be unclear about it too. Men, by nature, test boundaries. Not always maliciously, but naturally, they test to see what they can get away with, how far they can push, whether you truly believe in your own standards. And here's the truth, if you don't know yourself, you will fail that test every single time. But when you do know yourself, when you are grounded in your identity, no one can manipulate you with charm, no one can weaken you with pressure, no one can buy you with empty words. You become untouchable. Self-knowledge also prevents you from confusing attention with respect. Too many people mistake flattery for value, gifts for loyalty, or attraction for commitment. But when you know yourself, you see through the surface. You don't get distracted by gestures, you look at patterns. You don't get lost in compliments, you look at consistency. That's the difference between someone who chases approval and someone who commands it. Approval seekers are impressed by anything. Self-aware people measure everything. But let's go deeper. Knowing yourself requires solitude. It requires being comfortable alone, not because you don't want connection, but because you refuse to use connection as a crutch. If you are afraid of being alone, you will accept anything from anyone just to avoid that feeling. That is where disrespect lives, in desperation. But when you know yourself, you are not afraid of solitude, because solitude does not weaken you, it strengthens you. Alone, you build discipline. Alone, you discover your passions. Alone, you sharpen your standards. Then, when someone comes along, you are not looking for completion, you are looking for alignment. And alignment is everything. When you know yourself, you stop asking, who is he, in the shallow sense. Instead, you ask, does who he is align with who I am? That question eliminates 90% of the problems most people face. Because instead of trying to force someone into your life who doesn't fit, you filter them out immediately. That's how you save your time, your energy, and your peace. Here's what most people never understand: the relationship you have with yourself sets the standard for every other relationship in your life. If you know yourself and treat yourself with respect, you will not allow disrespect from anyone else. If you know yourself and value your growth, you will not settle for someone who holds you back. If you know yourself and live with purpose, you will not attach yourself to someone who is lost. But if you don't know yourself, you will accept whatever comes, even if it destroys you slowly. This is why the most powerful people don't chase, they attract. They attract not because they are desperate for validation, but because their self-awareness makes them magnetic. You can't fake knowing yourself. You can fake confidence. You can fake charm, you can fake success, but you cannot fake identity. People can feel it. They know instantly whether you are anchored or adrift. And those who are anchored, those who know themselves, demand respect without saying a word. The hardest part is that knowing yourself requires constant work. You are not a finished product, you are a work in progress. Who you are today may evolve tomorrow, but the discipline is the same. Check in with yourself, define yourself, and never outsource that responsibility to anyone else. Because the moment you allow someone else to tell you who you are, you have already surrendered control of your life. When you look at the world, one truth stands out: people who know themselves are respected, admired, and remembered. Those who don't are often overlooked, ignored, or taken for granted. That's because clarity of identity is power. And when it comes to relationships, especially between men and women, this truth is amplified. Before you ever concern yourself with who he is, you must have an unshakable grip on who you are. Because if you don't, then you will bend yourself into shapes that don't belong to you just to fit into his life. You see it everywhere. People lose themselves trying to please someone else. They change how they dress, how they speak, what they believe, and even what they dream about just to keep someone. But here's the brutal reality: when you give up who you are to win someone else, you don't win them, you lose yourself. And no relationship built on self-abandonment will ever bring true respect. Men respect women who know who they are. They respect women who stand firm, who cannot be swayed by flattery or pressure, because that firmness signals strength. Knowing yourself starts with asking the hard questions. What do I truly believe? What do I value? What are my non-negotiables? Most people skip these questions because they are uncomfortable. They don't want to face the possibility that they've been living by someone else's script. But if you don't define yourself, someone else will. And that someone else may not have your best interests at heart. That's why self-definition is not a luxury, it's survival. Let me make this clear: when you know who you are, you no longer chase titles or labels. You don't need to prove yourself with material things or external approval. You don't need to broadcast your worth, because it's already written in the way you carry yourself. Men notice that. The world notices that. People sense it in the way you walk into a room, not arrogant, but certain. Certainty is magnetic, and it only comes from deep self-awareness. Now, let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries are the natural extension of knowing yourself. If you know who you are, you know what you will and will not tolerate. You know what deserves your time and what doesn't. You know the difference between someone who aligns with your values and someone who only pretends to. And when you enforce those boundaries, people may not always like it, but they will respect it. Respect doesn't come from being agreeable. Respect comes from being clear. Clarity is rare. Most people live in confusion, constantly shifting to fit in, constantly doubting themselves. That's why those who know themselves stand out instantly. They are not swayed by opinion. They are not shaken by criticism. They are not blinded by praise. They remain steady because their foundation is internal, not external. That steadiness is exactly why people respect them. They are predictable in their values, unshakable in their identity, and unbreakable in their core. Another piece of this is purpose. When you know who you are, you know what you are here to do. You're not waiting for someone else to give your life meaning. You already walk with mission, and when you have that kind of purpose, relationships are no longer about filling a void. They are about building an empire. You don't ask, Who is he and what can he give me? Instead, you ask, does he align with my mission? Can we build together without me losing myself? That's the difference between living with intention and living with desperation. Desperation is dangerous. Desperation makes you ignore red flags. Desperation makes you silence your own voice. Desperation makes you accept less than you deserve because you're afraid of walking away. But when you know yourself, you are never desperate. You can want someone, but you don't need them to validate your existence. You can love someone, but you don't collapse if they don't love you back. That independence is strength, and strength always commands respect. And here's the truth: when you know who you are, people treat you differently. They adjust. They measure their words more carefully. They show up with more consistency. Why? Because they know you're not afraid to walk away. They know you won't stay where you're not respected. They know you cannot be manipulated with empty promises. And when people know you cannot be controlled, they are forced to respect you. But this requires courage, because knowing yourself means you might outgrow people. It means you might lose relationships built on the old version of you. It means you will have to walk alone sometimes, because not everyone can match your clarity. And that is where most people fail. They would rather keep company than keep identity. They would rather fit in than stand firm. But you can't have both. You either know yourself and command respect, or you lose yourself and settle for crumbs. So ask yourself again, who am I? Not who your family told you to be. Not who society expects you to be. Not who he wants you to be. Who are you? What do you believe? What will you fight for? What will you never compromise? Until those answers are clear, every relationship will be shaky because you will be building it on unstable ground. But the moment those answers are solid, you become immovable. And when you are immovable, the world has no choice but to take you seriously. Every time you look outward before you look inward, you set yourself up for disappointment. People spend so much energy studying others, asking what kind of man he is, how he feels, what he wants, yet they fail to study themselves. They fail to ask, who am I? What do I stand for? What do I demand from life? And because they never answered those questions, they walk into relationships blind, hoping that someone else will give them a definition, a direction, or a purpose. That is why so many lose themselves in the process. Knowing who you are is the highest form of strength because it keeps you from becoming a reflection of someone else's desires. When you don't know yourself, you adjust to fit whoever is in front of you. You shrink your dreams to make them comfortable. You silence your opinions to keep the peace. You give up your boundaries because you're afraid of being left. But when you know yourself, you never betray your identity for connection. You stand tall even if it means standing alone, and that strength is what earns respect. Men respect women who cannot be bent. The world respects people who cannot be bought. Respect is not earned by chasing approval. It is earned by refusing to betray your truth. If you know who you are, then no man can make you feel small, because your worth was never in his hands to begin with. You don't wait for him to choose you. You've already chosen yourself. You don't wait for him to validate your beauty, your intelligence, or your ambition. You've already validated it. That kind of certainty cannot be faked, and it cannot be ignored. This is why self-awareness is the foundation of every standard. Think about it. How can you demand loyalty if you don't know that loyalty is one of your core values? How can you expect respect if you haven't defined what respect looks like to you? How can you filter out the wrong people if you haven't clarified what the right people look like? Without knowing yourself, your standards are vague, and vague standards invite disrespect. But once you know yourself, your standards are sharp, clear, and unshakable. The truth is, relationships are mirrors. They reflect who you are back at you. If you are uncertain, you will attract uncertainty. If you are insecure, you will tolerate disrespect. If you are desperate, you will accept less. But when you are secure, you attract stability. When you are grounded, you demand consistency. When you are whole, you repel anyone who tries to break you. That is the difference between someone who lives with identity and someone who lives without it. But here's the challenge: knowing yourself is not a one-time decision. It is a lifelong practice. Every stage of life will test you. Success will tempt you to forget your values. Failure will pressure you to doubt your worth. Relationships will push you to compromise your boundaries, and every single time you must return to the question, who am I? If you don't, you will slowly drift into someone else's version of you. But if you keep that question alive, you will remain centered no matter how the world shifts around you. And let me be very clear, knowing yourself is not about perfection. It is about honesty. It is about confronting your flaws with the same courage you embrace your strengths. If you are impatient, own it. If you are fearful, face it. If you are inconsistent, admit it. Because once you know your weaknesses, no one can use them against you. That is power. But if you pretend, if you lie to yourself, if you cover up your flaws with denial, then every manipulator in the world will find your blind spots and use them to control you. This is why those who know themselves cannot be controlled. They cannot be shaken by opinions. They cannot be silenced by disapproval. They cannot be broken by rejection. Because they don't draw their identity from outside sources, they draw it from within. And when a woman lives with that kind of inner certainty, men have no choice but to treat her differently. They measure their words more carefully. They bring more consistency. They step up their respect because they know she won't accept anything less. Knowing yourself also changes the way you love. You stop loving out of fear, out of desperation, out of emptiness. You start loving from wholeness. You are no longer trying to be completed. You are already complete. And when two complete people come together, the relationship is stronger, healthier, and more powerful than any bond built on insecurity. That is the difference between attachment and alignment. Attachment is about filling a hole. Alignment is about building an empire, and you cannot have alignment until you know yourself. So before you ask who he is, stop and ask who you are. Before you study his character, study your own. Before you demand respect from him, make sure you respect yourself enough to never settle for less. Because once you know yourself, you stop chasing, you stop begging, you stop lowering your standards. Instead, you attract, you choose, you filter, you set the tone. And when you set the tone, everyone else either rises to meet it or falls away on their own.